People often ask me when I started following Jesus. It was the first time I heard him speak on a mountainside near the Sea of Galilee. My husband, Abel Cain, and I and our 4 children, Mark, Naomi, Hannah, and Rachel, had all gone to hear the new great speaker. I had packed a meal for us, which we ate, but as the day wore on and he spoke for hours and hours, our hunger rose. But we couldn't leave. The words he spoke, "Do good to your enemies. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Don't worry. You are the light of the world." These words were so fresh and new and different, and what was even more strange was that I could imagine myself even being able to live by them. I didn't want him to stop speaking. But then he did. He stopped. And we began gathering up our belongings, and then the word started to spread that there was no food in the next town available for purchase, not even bread. And my husband and I had walked several miles with our 4 children, and walking that distance with 4 hungry, grouchy children was not appealing to us. But what could we do? We started to leave. And at that moment, we heard Jesus' voice, "Sit down, we have food for you." We looked up, just in time to see the 12 start coming down the mountain carrying baskets of food. I laughed to Abel Cain. If those people up there are as hungry as we are down here, there will be no food by the time that basket gets to us. Come on, let's go. But he put that blanket down on the ground again and sat. And then Mark sat down beside him because he was always a great imitator of his father. What could I do? My husband wasn't going anywhere, so I sat too. Naomi started grumbling, but the other 2 girls ran off to find new friends again. It was 45 minutes before those baskets reached us. And when they did, Abel Cain reached in and got 1 loaf of bread and 3 fish, and then paused. Andrew looked at him and said, "Is that all you need?" "Well, I do have myself and my wife and my 4 children." "Well, take. We don't want anyone to be hungry." And so Abel Cain got 4 more loaves of bread and 8 more fish. And I started making a small fire and cooking the fish, and the women around me were doing the same. And they started talking, and some were saying that they believed that the words that Jesus spoke came straight from God. Others were saying he must be Elijah, come back again. And still others were saying his words were just the old law and the words of Moses and the prophets, just with a different twist, just like the scribes and Pharisees. We sat down to eat, and then the rumor came around us. Did you hear that Jesus and the disciples, they hadn't bought all that food. They never had any food. They just found a boy that had a few loaves of bread and a few fish, and Jesus blessed it and broke it, and then everyone has been fed. Well, Mark, always one for a good adventure, ran up the hill, and by the time he came back down, it was almost sunset. And he said it was true. Jesus had blessed the fish and the loaves, and everyone had eaten. Well, Abel Cain said that we would spend the night in the town and hear Jesus the next day. But when we got up early, we found that Jesus and the disciples were already gone. Some people even said that the disciples had gone on ahead in a boat, but Jesus had stayed behind. And yet, some people said he'd been spotted in Capernaum. How'd he get there? Walk on water? I almost believed that after eating the loaves and the fish. Well, Abel Cain paid for our passage across the Sea of Galilee on a very, very crowded boat. And then we heard Jesus speak again, but Jesus had only spoken for a little while when the people grew restless. They started asking for more bread. One man even called out, "I have wine that you could multiply, and I'll even offer a lamb." The noise grew so great that we couldn't hear Jesus speaking anymore. And Abel Cain's a big man, and he tried to get everyone to be quiet, but even his sighs couldn't quiet the mockers. But then Jesus' voice came through. I tell you the truth. You come to hear me not because of the miracles that you have seen, but because you ate of the bread. I tell you truly, seek the bread of eternal life, not bread that will pass away. The people began to murmur again amongst themselves and then began to question him. And those who weren't questioning began to scream for bread. And then Jesus said, I am the bread of life. People began to walk away angry, and I was standing unsure of what to do when Mark came up and grabbed my hand and said, no, Mama, we have to stay and hear Jesus. But even then, Jesus was walking away with his disciples. Abel Cain saw the same thing and started grabbing our things and said, to Jesus. And as we hurried along, I whispered to him, it's not about bread anymore, is it? And so we followed Jesus. We never stopped following Jesus. Abel Cain and I and Naomi and Mark were even baptized shortly after that. And then we began helping other new believers who were trying to follow the words of the Master. Sometimes we were given the responsibility of watching after the children. What a great privilege. Jesus would say to us that the children made up the kingdom of heaven. Well, there was all that I wanted to be was a little child because the kingdom of heaven was and is my goal. The children were so innocent and had a purity. They were lights. People say that all I do is talk about the light. The first time I heard Jesus speak, he talked about being the light of the world. A candle that is lit is not put underneath a basket. Be a light and shine before God. I would never have called myself a woman of purpose. I was just a wife and a mother. If I truly thought about it, after my children were grown and Abel Cain died, I would have had no life. But Jesus, he gave me a purpose. To share his word with others, to show them his love and the faith I have in him, to be a light. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine.